Hello and welcome to ISLA's CDM Showcase event on a chilly but bright 1st of December, at least it is here in Northeast London. Welcome to all of our audience from overseas as well. For our APAC attendees, thanks for making the time, as I know it's quite late for you. And for our American attendees, I hope you've all had a good Thanksgiving and the turkey coma's worn off a little, so you can focus on the common domain model. My name is David Schoen and I've been leading the digital initiatives of ISLA since June. And it's a great pleasure to showcase for you all today all of the work that we've achieved with the members of ISLA's digital working group over the last few months around the CDM. Before I hand over to our first speaker, I'd like to draw your attention to the Slido window on the side of the screen. First up, please enter any questions that you've got into the box and we will provide these to the speakers today where they have the time and the questions have relevance to them. Any questions that we don't get to today, we will endeavour to get you a written response out following the event. Second thing I would like to draw your attention to is the poll question, which will be going up in a second for you to answer over the course of the next 20 minutes. Please interact and give us an idea as to how clued up you are already. The question is, are you comfortable that you know what a common domain model or CDM is and what it is for? Answer 1, yes, absolutely. Excellent. Then this should be a reaffirming life event for you. 2, I think I do. 3, I know what it is, but its use escapes me. Well, we'll certainly cover some use cases today. 4, not really. 5, no idea. That's why I'm here. Well, welcome to your first step on the digital journey. And 6, sorry, I thought we were here to discuss construction design and management regulations. Well, acronyms are a bit annoying, aren't they? But feel free to stay and find out about a common domain model instead. I'll announce the results following our second speaker. So, without further ado, please let me introduce the eminent Andy Dyson, CEO of ISLA, to kick off proceedings proper.
Okay, David, many thanks for that introduction, and good afternoon and welcome to this ISLA CDM Showcase event. I was just looking at that question, and I guess the expectation is that I'm going to be answering one of the responses towards the top end of that list, but you never know. And I think it's important that we all use this event as part of our education, but also as part of that validation to understand a little bit about what the CDM is and what it isn't. When we asked a question at our last face-to-face conference in Madrid, I think it was last year, that seems a long time ago now, I think quite a lot of the respondents were towards the bottom end of the current questions, either didn't know what it was or thought they were there for another reason. Hopefully today we'll get a better response with more people being in those lower response numbers at the top, indicating that they're closer to what it is and certainly what we're doing. Okay, so look, once again, welcome. In welcoming you, I also wanted to talk for a few minutes about our journey to this point and the importance of this work to the future of the industry, and more broadly the impacts on financial services and what we expect to happen next. Just taking a step back for a moment, seems a long time ago now, but it was only September 2019 that we published our Agenda for Change white paper that outlined our vision for how our industry will head into the digital world. This was a bold step. We felt this was the right thing to do. If I could just have the next slide up, please. The slide you can see, thank you. The slide you can see here is an extract from that white paper where we identified a number of key elements or disciplines that any digital framework would need to address to succeed in our markets. And taking a moment to look at that wheel, actually, which is something that we've come back to again and again, I just wanted to bring your attention to a number of the elements of that wheel, some of which we've addressed in the CDM pilot study, some of which will be part of a future work stream. And I just wanted to draw your attention to the three sort of elements to the bottom right of the wheel. So contractual loading, allocations, and commencement of a trade. So taking those sort of three themes, we were keen to develop a pilot study that sort of allowed us to demonstrate that the proof of concept worked, but also it was able to be truly representative of our markets. And once developed, we'd be in a position to update this group and other interested industry stakeholders as to the progress we've made. And I'm delighted to say that by taking those three elements, we focused our pilot study, and that more will be discussed on this later on in the session. But the pilot study was built around elements of allocation, settlement, and execution. For those of you familiar with our markets, you'll understand that, in particular, allocation is a prickly pear of a problem we've been sort of grappling with for many years. So we thought it was a great opportunity to start thinking about, well, how do you look at that in a different way? And that's part of the journey that we took on board when we thought about the CDM project. So the objective of this initial piece of work was to prove the concept and develop some limited use cases or real world outputs. From my perspective, I believe this type of work cannot exist in a tech bubble. Sorry, techies on this call. And it has to have resonance or relevance to the real world. And therefore, the demos you're going to see a bit later on in the sessions will validate some of our concepts and show you some immediate real world outcomes. Without those real world outcomes, it's impossible to see where this type of technology leads you. So one of the things that probably I've been quite annoying about over the last 8-9 months is I need to see those real world benefits. I'm not a techie, but I do understand how businesses work, and I think it's important we always keep an eye on those outcomes. If anything, 2020 has underlined the importance of the digital agenda, with the role of technology from virtual events like this to online shopping reshaping almost everything that we do. And what we've learned by talking to member firms is that some of the areas which they did experience some problems with around the height of the volatility during the early days of the pandemic would lead them to conclude they need more work in this area around things like reconciliations and movements of trades around corporate events. So this work is more important than it ever was, and the pandemic has forced us, if you like, to think about this in a more proactive sort of way. Before I finish, I also just wanted to highlight. And it's not just us saying this. And I wanted to highlight a recent speech given by Nikhil Rathney, who is the new Chief Executive Officer of the FCA. In a speech to city regulators at Mansion House only on the 12th of November, he took the opportunity to look past the current COVID-led world towards a future state or a future world. And what would those priorities be? He outlined some quite ambitious thinking for the FCA, who will, for many of us, become our primary regulator again very shortly. And he was talking, amongst other things, about how to harness the power of data. This would include, according to his speech, how the FCA will transform and carry out financial regulation. We've already seen some of that and have been aware and tracked the pilot study that the FCA did around digital regulatory reporting. If there's one key message I would say to everyone on this call, digital regulatory reporting is coming. Regulators have learned a lot from things like SFTR. They've learned about standardization. They've learned about the power of people like industry associations to help, but they also recognize the importance of digitalization and data. Therefore, it's absolutely critical that we as a group, we as an industry, we as an association, that we're seen as leaders, not followers here. If we're not leaders and we become the inevitable followers, we lose control of our agenda. And frankly, that's just not where we want to be. So as we look forward out into 2021, I see that this event is absolutely pivotal as we think about defining, what we're going to be spending a lot of our time and resources on as we go into next year. Could I just have the next slide, please? Okay, thank you. So as I close, I think it's incumbent upon me to thank all the firms you can see before you for their contribution to this pilot study, both in terms of data, thought leadership, ideas and constructs. So I'd like to thank all of them. I think it's important that we recognise all these firms as people who get it. They understand the importance of what we're doing here. And obviously, the final thing before I hand back to David, I'd also like to thank Regnosis, who have been our development partner during this initial part of our journey. I know we're hearing from them a bit later on during the session, so I'd obviously like to put a shout out to them and thank them for their efforts as part of the group. That's it from me, David. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Yep, thanks for grounding today's event in the real world, and the benefits of the CDM in the real world are certainly important. We should see some of that today. I'd like to reiterate your thank you to those that were involved in the project and their invaluable insights. They've certainly made my job easier over the last few months. One of the organizations up there was ISDA, the association who, of course, initially pioneered the CDM concept and whose work enabled us to make swift early gains during the pilot. Next up, we have a trailblazer at ISDA who's led their CDM initiative for a number of years, Ian Sloyan. Ian will give us an overview of their journey to date. Ian, welcome.
Hi there, and thank you to David and Andy and all of ISLA for inviting me here today. I've never been described as a trailblazer, but I'll take that. Thank you very much. So I think my job is to possibly try and raise the results of the survey and put maybe in a very general context where the CDM idea came from, the benefits of it. So let's hopefully go through that now. So where did the idea come from? Well, around 2016 ISDA was looking at, with our market infrastructure and technology groups, looking at the problems in the market. And we were trying to think about how we can help members better realize the potential of technology. And we thought about, we surveyed members and we put together a white paper, and we really thought that the issues boil down to this picture here, which is the market infrastructure and the challenge we face. We have a lot of different participants in the market, regulators, trading entities, trade repositories, depositories, clearinghouses, and really the issue boils down to inconsistent data and processes, meaning that while the data capture of a transaction, whether it be securities lending transaction or a derivative trade, they are captured differently at source, and then when they are amended over time during their life cycle, they are amended in different ways, meaning that the data is never in sync, and we have costly reconciliations to try and keep the data in sync. There's never really an opportunity to mutualize the costly but not really differentiating processes like regulations. Well, they certainly shouldn't be differentiating. So this is really the problem we faced, and I think we still face, and what the CDM aims to solve. So we're going to go into a bit more detail on the benefits around this and what the CDM is. So where does the CDM fit? Well, ISDA's digital strategy really boils down to three words: standardize, digitize, and distribute. And we're joined on that in that strategy by a number of other trade associations, notably my host here today, ISLA, but recently ISDA sent a joint letter to regulators with the other 7 trade associations outlining this vision where we need to standardize the legal documentation. We need to digitize it in a form that is sort of digitally native, and then we need to distribute it to market participants so that they can use these digital standards in a much easier way. And that's really where the CDM fits in the digitization and the distribution elements of that strategy. If we move on, I'm going to talk a little bit about the benefits of the CDM, and then we'll get to what this thing is. So the CDM offers the potential to standardize representations of products in the life cycle to try and solve that mixed up picture that we saw of the market infrastructure on the first slide. Promotes transparency and alignment between regulators, very important. I know the securities lending market has just gone through SFTR implementation. I'm sure the potential of CDM to help with that, and future iterations of that is very welcome. And also, the CDM allows an accelerated path to innovation. And we'll look at these benefits in a bit more detail now. So I just want, I have the easy job today. There's a lot more detail to come, but I want to try and give people a vision of the benefits to keep in mind as you go through all the quite complex and detailed work that's been done through the ISLA pilot. So if we think about how innovation happens today, how do parties build new systems? Well, if we look at the top two streams, people have to research the business domain. They need to gain subject matter expertise in a problem. They need to design a proprietary model. They need to implement that model on technology, decide is it going to be in the cloud, on a DLT, whatever it may be. Then they need to convince the market that the solution is reliable and consistent with market practices. And the outcome is this system in yellow, which probably does the job. The next team come along and try and build a system, maybe doing the same thing, maybe doing something similar, and we get the outcome as a system there in green. Not necessarily talking to each other, without the benefit of common standards. The systems, may not be complementary to each other even. With the CDM or a CDM approach, we can shorten that life cycle to innovation, where people just need to learn about CDM, implement its components when building systems provided from open source libraries that we provide, and then the outcome are systems which are interoperable by design, by the very fact that they've used the same standards. There's a shorter time to market, hopefully, and association with recognized standard set from the likes of ISDA and now ISLA. If we look at the next slide, another thing to keep in mind is just to go into a bit more detail of that market infrastructure challenge. So how can we move to the reduction of reconciliation and really achieve straight through processing? Well, if we think about the process today, whatever market you're in, how a trade is captured and then something goes wrong. Parties capture the trade in different terms, in different ways. And then at every point during the life cycle, they amend the trade in different ways. And the outcome is a lot of costly reconciliation, as I mentioned. With the CDM, hopefully we can provide code that can allow people to implement these life cycle events in a consistent manner, and also capture the trade and all the relevant trade data in a consistent manner. So you'll see the little box there for a CSA or any other legal agreement. That can all be standardized and stored in a consistent way. So how do we do this? What is this thing, this mysterious CDM I speak of? So common domain model is a model. That's all it is. It's really the thing to keep in mind. A model, it is a way of describing, a standard for describing how we represent products as data, how we then do calculations and events on that data over the life cycle. There's a lot more detail to come, so I won't labor the point, but the key thing is that it's open access. We then distribute the model, and thinking about those three: standardize, digitize, distribute. We distribute the model and make it accessible in an open way in many different languages, so that people building systems can easily interact with the model and use it. That's key. We need people to use the model natively on their systems. There's going to be a lot more examples of this, as I said, but hopefully that is clear. And maybe to keep in mind sort of the components that in the CDM that are important, and again to sort of lay a framework for how you review things as we go forward. We have the CDM, which involves base types, a consistent model for data types that are used, say, between securities lending and between derivatives. We have linkages to legal agreements. We can construct trade workflows as well. And then importantly, we can project out to do things like regulatory reporting or meet other regulations. So if we keep all these different components and kind of vision and framework for the CDM in mind as you go forth, I think the rest of the afternoon should be very interesting. But we do welcome ISLA's involvement now in the CDM, and we're very excited to see the progress thus far on this pilot. It's been kind of lonely out on the vanguard of this type of thinking in the market, but it's very welcome to have ISLA on that lead bandwagon, and we're looking forward to see what can be achieved, or what has been achieved, and what can be achieved in future phases of this work. David, back to you.
Ian, thank you for that detailed background and for sharing ISDA's journey so far. I think many of the principles and benefits that you've mentioned should have sparked recognition amongst virtually every firm that are listening in today. Hopefully that means audience interest has been piqued and we are ready to dive into the work completed at ISLA this year and our member demonstrations. But just before I do that, I want to take a look at the results from the poll, which should be on your screen now. The question I asked was, are you comfortable that you know what a common domain model or a CDM is and what it is for? It looks like out of 90 respondees, approximately 68% of you, so just over 2/3, have responded positively. I'll be honest, that's more than I expected to have that level of positive understanding. So there's a little bit of pressure on our demonstrators to do you justice today. I also noticed that we had 0 people seeking out the construction design and management event. So Sedge, Claudia, and our marketing team must have knocked it out of the park in advertising the event. I hope that following Ian's presentation, you've got a clearer idea and are ready to see the CDM in action. First up in our extravaganza of demos is the team at Regnosis, who've been our technology partners during this pilot, as Andy mentioned, giving an overview of the CDM from a technical perspective, the modeling process, and their principal tool, Rosetta. I'll now hand you over to Saeed Atarian to lead off.
Thank you, David. It's actually it's Nigel,
Nigel.
At Regnosis picking up. So thank you, David, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. In this session, we're going to introduce Regnosis, how the CDM has been extended for securities lending, followed by a demonstration of the Rosetta platform. There will be some time available at the end of our session, so if you have any questions, please submit them while we're presenting, and we will answer them then. Firstly, let us introduce ourselves. I am Nigel Cobb, Senior Data Modeler at Regnosis. I'm responsible for partnering with our clients on the continued development of the common domain model.
And I am Saeed Atarian, consultant at Regnosis. I'm responsible for the development of the securities finance components of the CDM.
Thank you, Saeed. So, over 4 months, Regnosis has partnered with ISLA and the working group of experts from the industry to successfully extend the CDM for the securities lending market. This has been achieved through leveraging and enhancing existing model components, as well as extending the model to include additional market-specific concepts where required. The end-to-end demonstration that you will see will illustrate how the concepts that have been developed can be implemented in a front-to-back workflow across the key cycle events of execution, allocation, and settlement. You will also see how the tooling provided by Regnosis can ease the cost of adoption through providing a translation engine that facilitates interoperability across platforms and organizations. So the purpose of the CDM as a digital model for the representation of products, calculations, and events has already been articulated by Ian. I think it's important to note that the CDM should not be considered a new standard, but more the consolidation of existing standards. It facilitates interoperability between existing platforms and data formats through the provision of translation functionality. It also accelerates adoption through validation and processing logic, bringing consistency to the representation of events across the market. The demonstrations you will see from the other participants will illustrate how this can be achieved. Before we look into the securities lending model in further detail, we would like to take a moment to introduce Regnosis. for which I'll hand over to my colleague Saeed.
Thanks, Nigel, and hello again, everyone. So Regnosis is a regulatory technology company whose mission is to transform the relationship between investment firms and the regulators. We leverage cloud technology and the power of open source software to digitize the global framework for collecting regulatory data. To this end, we have developed a product which provides a platform for data modeling called Rosetta. At a high level, Rosetta is made up of 3 components. These are, firstly, the Rosetta domain-specific language, or the DSL, which is the syntax used to describe the model. Secondly, the model repository, which houses the CDM and is free to access under applicable license terms. And finally, Rosetta Core, which provides the functionality to develop the model and test and deploy implementations of the CDM. The community edition of Rosetta Core is freely available for use by market participants. At the start of the engagement, Regnosis and ISLA agreed a set of goals and objectives to be delivered over the course of the initial engagement. The main objectives were as follows. We model the main product features of a basic securities lending product, model the definition of a cash collateralized DVP securities lending transaction, model the definition of the allocation function and the inputs that support the allocation lifecycle event, model the definition of the settlement function and the inputs that support the settlement lifecycle event, demonstrate the performance of the model through the running of events on the platform using sample transaction data, and of course, support the testing and implementation of applications of the model by market participants. The completion of these goals and objectives allows a conceptual end-to-end process to be put together, representing a simple workflow for a securities lending transaction. So the conceptual model of an end-to-end process can be divided into 3 main areas as per our goals and objectives for the pilots: execution, allocation, and settlement. The transaction model in the CDM is used to describe an execution. This is a business event which contains all the terms required to describe the securities lending agreement that the parties have entered into. Following the execution, the next lifecycle event for securities lending transaction is allocation. The CDM provides a function that programmatically generates the required output for an allocation event. Given an execution, also known as block trade, and allocation instruction, which describe how the block trade should be split across multiple lenders, a set of allocation can be programmatically generated using accuracy and consistency through the post-trade lifecycle. Finally, the settlement function, which in the CDM takes the set of allocation and programmatically generates into instructions to transfer the cash and securities that is required by entering into a securities lending transaction. Through existing industry infrastructure, the physical movement of the security and collateral is achieved. And finally, the securities lending transaction can be marked as settled, indicating the completion of the workflow. So during today's demonstrations by participants, we will be looking at an execution, and allocation and the reconciliation of a loan, simulating the real-life end-to-end flow between vendor platforms. Each participant will demonstrate the role the platform performs in the trade lifecycle and how they have used the Rosetta integration service to communicate across participants using the CDM. Over the course of just a few weeks, it's been possible to implement a flow where each vendor is able to send and receive messages in the CDM format, demonstrating how industry adoption is a realistic and an achievable goal.
Rosetta Core is a cloud-based application. Sorry, the video started a little earlier. So thank you, Saeed. Next, we would like to demonstrate how the Rosetta platform provides the tools to develop the CDM and to then test and deploy the model across the industry. We've recorded a short video to demonstrate that. Rosetta Core is a cloud-based application which is accessible through a web browser. It is used to view, edit, and use the common domain model. Here we are viewing an extension to the CDM for securities lending, which is a private session only accessible by permissioned users, containing the CDM model extensions that have been developed as part of the initial engagement. This is the graphical view of the CDM in Rosetta Core. The graphical view shows an entity relationship diagram of the model components in the CDM. It can be used to review and navigate the hierarchy of the data model. Through the collaboration of participants on the ISLA CDM steering group, a new payout type has been added to the model called Security Lending Payout. This allows the key terms of a security lending product to be specified, such as the security borrowed, the start date and end date of the transaction, and relevant collateral provisions. The CDM is designed based on the concept of composability and reusability of data elements. Because of this, in many instances, it has been possible to leverage existing model components. This is the validation view of the CDM in Rosetta Core. This view allows a user to upload a data file containing a transaction represented using the CDM model. The tooling allows the user to review the input file and see any data validation errors identified. Let's review a sample securities lending transaction. The data model viewed previously is machine executable and contains validation constraints which can be used to ensure message integrity. This sample demonstrates how a securities lending transaction execution would be represented using the CDM. The format of the data structure allows the transaction to be inspected by each key component, such as parties to the transaction, price, or product terms. Finally, the CDM contains the functionality to uniquely qualify the nature of a product based on its economic terms. Rather than relying on market practitioners to include this information for the purposes of regulatory reporting, for example, the CDM can populate this value using a business logic aligned onto a market-agreed definition. This is the visualization view of the CDM in Rosetta Core. This view allows a user to upload an input file and view the output of a function which has been defined in the CDM. The visualization window shows the relationship between the key data components in the output message. Let's review the allocation function. This view demonstrates how the CDM can take an input file containing an execution and the required allocation breakdown information, and use the create allocation function to automatically create valid CDM messages representing the allocated transactions. In this example, a block execution is being allocated against 2 funds. The event is qualified by the CDM as an allocation based on the event components. We can see that the original execution is now closed with a close state of allocated. And 2 new contracts exist, one with beneficial owner of lender 1 and the other with lender 2. Let's now review the settlement function. This view demonstrates how the CDM can take an input file containing a securities lending transaction and create the required transfer of cash and securities at the initiation of the trade. In this example, a transfer is being generated of a security and cash movement based on the input of a securities lending transaction. The transfer is marked as delivery versus payment, and the event is qualified by the CDM as a security settlement based on the event components. The lender is delivering 50,000 securities to the borrower, and in return, the borrower is delivering cash to the lender. If your technology systems don't speak CDM, don't worry. Rosetta comes with a suite of tools designed to lower costs of CDM adoption. Data mappings can be created, tested, and deployed directly in the application to provide an integration layer with your systems. As your systems or the CDM change, a comprehensive test pack will help identify gaps ahead of any upgrades. And all data translation functionalities are accessible via API. This feature is going to be heavily used as part of the demonstrations you are going to see today. This concludes the demonstration. Thank you. Thank you. So we've got some time for questions, and there are a couple of questions already on the live stream. I think the first question David is going to answer on the provision of reconciliations.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Nigel. Yeah, I thought I'd just take this, given it's been out there for a little while. So the question is, aren't vendors already providing these reconciliation processes? And as trade associations, should the concern be in best practices? I think the first part of the question belies a bit of a misunderstanding about how fundamental the CDM actually is. I believe that the CDM transcends the need for reconciliation. And even in any sort of interim state, it will actually improve a vendor's offering should they use a CDM in order to actually combine models in a much more efficient way. And some of our demonstrations later on will focus on that interoperability and how that improves matters. That will also hopefully in a demonstration in two demos time give you a better sense of why we as a trade association are leading on this. That's all I'm going to say on it now. We can come back to it, ask again if you feel that towards the end that is I haven't had your question answered, but that's how I feel about that. Do you agree, Nigel?
Yeah, absolutely. The purpose of the common domain model, as was articulated by Ian, is to hopefully reduce the need for reconciliations. The reason those exist across all firms is because of the amount of connectivity points and translations between different data formats that happen. The provision of the common model and also a common functional model, not just a product model, harmonizes the way that events are being processed and sent around the industry, which should eliminate at least the issues that appear on reconciliations.
Yep, that functional part is very, very, very important too. Sorry, Nigel.
That's right.
Do you want to address question number 3?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I'll address number 3. So the common domain model, as its name suggests, is supposed to be common. It has at its heart a design principle of being composable and reusable. What that means is the data components that have been developed by ISDA over the last few years were reused in order to develop the securities lending model. Obviously, there are market-specific concepts which are required, specifically the representation of a securities lending product. But that aside, the consistency across the markets is very, very high. So we're able to reuse concepts such as security to represent the reference asset, the events themselves, the processes, how you allocate a trade is consistent across markets. So there's a significant amount of commonality.
Great, thank you. I'm afraid we are up at time on your slot. Perhaps if there's time later, we can look at further things. Thank you, Nigel, Saeed, for that thorough talk through of Rosetta, the modeling, the Q&A, and of course all the work you've done this year. Now, I'd like to swiftly move on to the service provider demos, if I may. As mentioned by Regnosis, our demos today illustrate the first day in the life of a securities loan. So from execution through to contract compare. I'll now pass you to Colin Arola and Dharm Kapadia at EquiLend to start us with the execution demo.
Thank you, David, and thank you to ISLA for allowing this this opportunity to work in the working group and as well as to showcase today. For those of you, my name's Carlton Arola, and I'm joined by my colleague Dharm Kapadia. For those of you not familiar with EquiLend, we are a global financial technology firm where we specialize in offering solutions for trade securities lending, collateral, and swaps trading solutions. We allow for all the services. We cover trading, post-trade, clearing, market data, and our clients are based out of agent lenders, broker-dealers, and beneficial owners of all sizes and geographical locations. We're very excited. Next year, we'll be celebrating our milestone of 20 years of providing services for the securities finance community. A little bit about our group. Dharma and I are associate directors at EquiLend. We're part of a team called Data Strategy, Architecture, and Governance. A little bit of a long name there, but it definitely helps to accurately describe the uniqueness of our group. We work to define and evolve the processes and technologies that we use internally to house our data and organize and handle the data within EquiLend. We have an internal mantra. We use people, process, and product. Using those principles, it helps us to really achieve our goals of organizing our data and goldenizing it so we can use it for machine learning, for analytics, for reporting, for various data needs and insights. CDM to us is a natural fit for our group because it's kind of a little of the core of what we do in terms of working with data and modeling. A little bit of background on ourselves. Dharm specializes in artificial intelligence and machine learning and data sciences, where myself is more focused around product development and business analysis and Scrum mastery. We both have, between us and our team, we both have a lot of general practitioner knowledge and experience, which we will use as one of the more adventurous aspects of our team is to do proof of concepts or POCs to see how a new technology or a new process will behave in our data ecosystem. At the outset of the pilot, we were tasked with showcasing a segment of the broader trade lifecycle. As mentioned earlier, the working group was focused on those core events: trade execution, trade allocation, trade settlement. While our EquiLend suite of services does cover the entire lifecycle, for the purpose of this exercise, we begun with that first theoretical use case of that trade execution. Taking a step back, the CDM, as previously described, is really intended to be applied to the entirety of the trade lifecycle to form consistent and holistic industry standards. It's no stranger to EquiLend, as we were founded 20 years ago by a consortium of our owner clients composed of borrowers and lenders with that purpose, where we defined our first protocol called Securities Lending Markup Language, or SLML. Through the years, we've had practice applying that and using it, getting feedback, enhancing it, and supporting it. So as we're going to showcase today what we did for the trade, as further elements are for the trade execution, as further elements are defined by the CDM, we'll utilize that knowledge and experience to help further define those elements, and as well as to help to showcase and apply those. I mentioned consistent and holistic. It's important to note that we have the various, it's great to be consistent in that at each one of these services here, we send information to the parties, party counterparty, a borrower lender, perhaps third parties, whether it's tri-party or clearing. So it's important to be consistent as they have the same information, as well as holistic. Each of these services that EquiLend provides does actually represent an event on that life cycle of the same trade. So while they're separate services, the data is all connected. So it's important for us to acknowledge that. That way we are able to organize and structure and merge the technology and the business and the data to meet the needs and solutions. Having that holistic and consistent view allows our clients to be in sync with us, be in sync with their counterparts, be in sync with their systems, whether it's a trading system, post-op system, billing system, the regulatory bodies, if there's any reporting. It even helps us as we go further into market data. We having more accurate data and consistent data to aggregate and potentially run through AI models, machine learning algorithms to get further insights to feed back into that process to make things more efficient, to automate things. So it's all, this interconnected space. So back to the task at hand, we want to talk about the trade execution, which we ended up starting with our NGT service, otherwise known as Next Generation Trading. This is our trading platform for securities lending. It provides ability to do multiple asset classes. It is a collection of workflows and protocols which allow our clients to price discover, to negotiate, and ultimately lead to a trade execution. A lot of our clients who onboard onto this are looking to automate their process, or to just increase their balances. We're ultimately aiming to get to the shared trade ticket, but in order to get there, we allow our clients to integrate in plethora of ways. At the simplest form, manually through our proprietary trading screens, all the way up to full-blown STP or straight-through processing, where they send messages from their process system into us, and allows them to bilaterally communicate with their counterparts back and forth. That way, ultimately leading to that shared trade ticket, which is the net result of the NGT workflow. Today, we'll be showing the workflow as it connects, and my colleague Dharm will be walking through that process of how we convert that into the CDM model.
Thank you, Carlton. Hello, everyone. My name is Dharm Kapadia. I will walk you through the demonstration of EquiLend's application of the CDM through the integration services that have been described previously. As Carlton detailed, our demonstration today will focus on the trade execution portion of the securities lending trade lifecycle. Now, we'll execute functionality within the CDM to validate and map an NGT shared trade ticket to the CDM via an API call, which was set up in the integration services. Now, in order to realize this functionality to the CDM, we worked collaboratively with the ISLA team to map the individual shared trade ticket attributes to the appropriate CDM data fields, to define the data validation rules, and to identify the required data transformations. This was a back and forth process, but once it was done, it was programmed into the integration services and exposed by that API. Sorry, we had a little bit of technical difficulty there with the slide. Now, to facilitate this demo, ISLA shared the details of a sample trade ticket with us. You can see the parameters of that shared trade ticket here. We generated a shared trade ticket in NGT output protocol using these parameters. Now, this trade ticket outlines a cash delivery versus payment, or DVP trade. It's one of the simpler securities lending use cases, but it demonstrates a successful, complete end-to-end example of the CDM mapping through the integration services. Now, in a moment, we'll show a pre-recorded video demonstrating that trade execution mapping exercise using the shared trade ticket to the CDM. And then following the demonstration, we'll return to the live stream to conclude our portion of the showcase. If we can now run the video, please.
Hello, and welcome to the demonstration of the mapping between EquiLend's NGT trading platform and ISLA'S CDM. In this video, we will be demonstrating the live transformation of a securities lending trade from EquiLend's proprietary NGT messaging protocol to the ISLA Common Domain Model, or CDM. The current slide you are seeing is an overview of the demo, as well as an insight into what goes on behind the scenes. On the one side of this diagram, we have EquiLend's NGT trading venue. On the other side, we have the CDM model representation of a securities lending trade. And in the middle are the mapping or transformation rules which are applied between the two. A set of programmatic data mappings and transformations were created by ISLA between an NGT shared trade ticket message and the ISLA CDM model structure. These mappings are encapsulated in the box shown right here. When an EquiLend shared trade ticket in native format is sent to the CDM API, the mapping rules are applied individually to the received data field to first validate the data element and then to transform and map it to the appropriate CDM field. Once all the fields have been processed, the API sends a response back to EquiLend with the results of the mapping. And this next slide outlines the trade parameters provided by ISLA that we will be mapping to the CDM via the API. As you can see on this slide, this is a cash DVP trade for the indicated CDOL. The relevant pricing, collateral, and other trade attributes are detailed here in their respective boxes. These trade attributes were executed via the NGT venue, producing the NGT trade ticket shown here. As is the case with many trades, this shared trade ticket contains both required as well as optional fields. One point to note for this demo is that not all of the optional fields have yet been mapped by ISLA between the NGT trade ticket messaging protocol and the CDM model. Let's take a look at what this sample trade ticket would be coming out of NGT. What you're seeing now is the NGT messaging protocol output in the format expected by the CDM, containing the sample trade ticket details from the previous slide. The trade ticket attributes, both required and optional, have been placed within the appropriate XML tags. Finally, we will show the actual API call mapping, transformation, and response of this NGT trade ticket through this visual interface. I have created the structure of the API call to the CDM and taken the liberty of preloading the CDM API call with the trade ticket data previously displayed in the appropriate NGT messaging protocol format. When I click on the send button, it will execute the same API call that NGT would make at runtime, and the entire trade ticket will get sent to the CDM API, validated, mapped, and then a response will be quickly returned back to this visual interface. As you can see, the API call was successful. We can view the response from the API and verify there were no validation errors. This is the section of the API response which would contain any errors if the API found them. The array that is returned is empty, signifying that there were no validation errors. The required fields were mapped and transformed successfully, which is indicated by this true flag for success. As expected at this stage, the optional fields failed the mapping. Naturally, in a production environment, the sending of the NGT trade ticket to the CDM and the processing of the subsequent response would happen programmatically with no manual intervention. This concludes our demonstration of the mapping between EquiLend's NGT trading platform and ISLA CDM. Thank you.
And we are live again. That concludes our pre-recorded video demonstration. We hope the demonstration was able to offer you a glimpse into the real-world possibilities of applying the CDM to a portion of the securities lending lifecycle, which in our case was trade execution. EquiLend is proud to have been actively involved with the ISLA Digital Working Group and the CDM, and we look forward to staying close to the process for the collaboration. We'd like to thank everyone in the ISLA Digital Working Group for their efforts. We're also eager to hear feedback from our stakeholders, our clients, and the street on their efforts for application of the CDM to their platforms and to what they are envisioning moving forward. There's a couple of questions. I think we can take one, and there's a question on who owns the API box. So in the case of the demonstration, the API box is part of the integration services that were provided, and EquiLend worked with Regnosis to be able to perform the mapping, and the API itself was part of the Regnosis integration services. And I believe that's it. So thank you again very much for your time. David, I will pass the mic back to you.
Thank you, Dom and Carlton, for that accomplished presentation. So I believe that we'll now see the same trade allocated and booked into FIS's lending platform. Chris Rayner at FIS was due to be with us, but unfortunately can't be due to unforeseen circumstances. He did, however, get a chance to film his speeches and demonstration, which shows a real dedication to the CDM cause, I think. Introducing the videos is the ever eloquent Ted Allen of FIS.
Thanks, David. Unforeseen circumstances indeed, yes. But the good news is you get to join me from my loft in West London, which is why I appear to be stuck in a Velux window. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity. FIS is very pleased to support this. If we could just move on to the first slide. I just wanted to just introduce FIS for anyone who is not aware of who we are. So we are probably the largest fintech in the world. We've been around for around 50 years or so. We've got 55,000 people operating across 48 countries across the globe. So we have a very broad reach. Not all of those people, of course, are in the securities finance world, but we serve banking and payments and capital markets for a really wide range of organizations. So that's FIS broadly. Let's focus in on our securities finance and collateral division. So if you could just pop to the next slide. So we're probably the major player in securities finance technology and have been for over 30 years. So we support the whole trade lifecycle management through our platforms like Global One and LoanNet and Apex. And we believe having that reach and penetration in the market, it's really behove upon us to provide the leadership, and hence why we're very pleased to be part of this initiative. We've got a strategy for securities finance and collateral that is based on really three pillars: platform modernization, the adoption of more advanced technologies, and the smart integration of our components into the broader infrastructure. And CDM really does fit very well into that strategy, and we think there's some really excellent opportunities for benefits for the market generally. What's really great to see, I think, is having three major service providers in EquiLend, FIS, and Pyram together, showcasing this CDM and the investment that we've made in bringing this this proof of concept to you all today. So I think that's been quite a well-run process and a good example of how vendors can work together. So we've seen EquiLend manage the execution of the trade on NGT and convert that into the CDM model. So we're going to hand over to the video of Chris Rayner, who is going to show you what happens next on the FIS agency lending platform through the allocations and then onwards through its whole life cycle. So if we can roll the video.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the demo. Today I thought I'd start off with a bit of my background. And so I am a software specialist at FIS, concentrating on agency lending platforms, which I've been working with for the past 25 years. Over that period, I've been involved in a large number of both technical and business-focused projects, predominantly working as a developer and a project lead. More recently, I've been assisting our development teams as a Scrum Master, where we've been employing agile processes for our lifecycle development for the past 7 years or so. FIS's agency lending products have been at the heart of international securities financing for well over 20 years now, and I'm very pleased to have been a part of our growth and ongoing success in this arena. Today, I'm going to be showcasing the work that the ISLA CDM subgroup have been undertaking for the past 4 months, which was primarily to model the allocation process. Now, the demonstration will be of a more technical nature, but all I'm really going to be doing is creating a block trade on our FIS agency lending platform with 4 allocations underneath it, and then I'm going to pass this to the CDM as an XML file for processing. Now, the steps I'm going to take to demonstrate this are firstly to create a control code using our application standard output system, and that's going to control what we put into the XML file. Then I'm going to post our block trade with the 4 allocations underneath it. Then I'm going to generate the XML file using the control code we set up previously. Then I'm going to send that XML file to Rosetta. Now, Rosetta is where the CDM is housed, and it will process, which is termed ingest, the XML and return me a CDM object in JSON format. Once I've got that object back, we'll be able to review the object, and we'll be able to see that it represents the XML that we just sent it, and we'll also be able to look and see if there are any errors returned, for example. Okay, so let's get started. Let me share my screen and switch to my headset. Okay, so there we go. Here I have a session to our agency lending platform. Its system date is set to a few months ago, which is when we started testing the CDM. We just left it as that date to keep things nice and simple while we worked on the pilot. Also, to keep the scope of the pilot nice and small, we're focusing just on cash DVP trades, and we're creating trades with a minimal amount of data in them. So to generate the XML file, which I'm going to send to the CDM, I've created a control code. And if we open it up, we'll see it's an XML type. The file type there is XML. Not much data in it at all, keeping it nice and simple for the time being. If we have a look at the XML details, you'll see that the tag names for the data, it's just left as the default field names, tag names set by the system. They're just prefixed with activity. In the header, set the XML prologue and just added a root node of FIS_trade. And in the footer, just closing that root node of FIS trade. Okay. If we continue on to the second page of the control code, we can see this is where we define what gets put into the file. We're just picking up the pending loans, and I want to see them at both the trade and the fund level, which means I'll see a record in the file for the trade itself, which will be the execution, and then I'll see records for each of the allocations, and we're going to be posting a trade with 4 allocations on it. So we'll see 1 record for the trade and 4 for the different allocations. So we'll see 5 in the file in total. Okay, the reason why we chose XML is the format is really just that that's quite easy for the CDM to recognize at the moment. It'll also mean it's quite easy for us to compare the XML and the JSON, which is returned by the CDM a bit later on. Okay, so let's now go and create our trade. And we're just going to use a dummy security, dummy counterparty set up as cash, and we'll do 50 million shares. Not too worried about the benchmark rates, just put a rate in there. And we're going to perform the allocations ourselves, not going to auto allocate. So we'll give 20 million to the first trade, 10 million to the second, 15 to the third, and the remaining 5 million to the fourth trade. So remember, we're going to set this as DVP. There we go. And so let's post that. There we go. We've now created our trade. So now we can go away and we can actually generate our file. So let's go into the activity file, use the control code we created earlier. Okay, so that should have gone away and created our file. Let's go and have a look. Let's refresh this link. There we go. There's our file. Bring that across. Let's have a look. There it is. Let's open this in Internet Explorer. That displays it quite nicely. Let's collapse all of these activity records. So as expected, then we've got 5 records essentially in the XML. The first one is for the execution, so we should see quantity of 50 million, which we do. Then these 4 are for the 4 allocations. If we look at the third one, for example, we'll see the quantity of 15 million. We see there's with on number 3, and we see the dummy LEIs there, which we'll be using in Rosetta. Okay, so now we have got our XML file. We can pass this to the CDM for processing. So let's come across here and let's just quickly transfer that across to the machine which has got access to the CDM. So let's have a look. Oops, Daisy here. Okay, good. Let's just move that file to a simpler name. And in here in my stack, we've got the curl command. There we go. Which is going to send the request through to Rosetta. And the JSON, which is going to return to us, I'm just redirecting into a file to make it easier for us to have a look at. So basically, when I run this, that's going to go through, send our XML through to Rosetta, so through to the CDM. CDM is going to process it. It's then going to return us a CDM object in JSON format. So let's have a look. There we go. There's our file. Let's refresh this, and let's bring this across to the local machine as well. So when that's arrived, we can have a look at that, and we'll open that. Let's use Firefox. That displays it quite nicely. Okay. Now, the piece that we're interested in is under this Rosetta model instance. That is the piece that's got the representation of our XML that we sent through. So if we have a look under here, we'll see under the primitives that we've got the original trade and the split trade. So the original trade is the execution, and the split trade is the allocation. So if you look at the execution, let's have a look and just check that the quantity is shown as 50 million. Yep, there we go, 50 million. And if we go into the split trades, look at the third one, that's one we looked at previously. Let's have a look, check that the quantity in here is 15 million. And it is, very good. Okay, so now that we've got this CDM representation of the data, we can pass this on to other systems that also support the CDM. We can also look, if you look at the object, there's also more information returned, quite a lot more information. There's details about the input validation, any errors would have been returned. There's also lots of details about the mapping, any sort of errors that came through. So a lot of detail returned with the object, which can be used to go through and just make sure that if there are any errors, see if we can react to those errors, etc. So lots of detail there. So what have we just seen? Well, in conceptual terms, we've just had a loan request come in to an agency lender's system. The request could have come from EquiLend's NGT or from any other internal or external source. The request was fulfilled by the lender, a trade was posted, and the resultant execution and allocations were sent to the CDM for conversion into a CDM object. Now, that CDM object can then be passed on to another system, be it internal or external, for further processing, which could be for reconciliation purposes by Pyram, for example. Now, the CDM facilitates this communication between disparate systems by standardizing the data. And we are seeing more and more of a push throughout the industry for data standardization. The most obvious of these over recent years has been SFTR and the ISO 20022 standard, which is standardizing the way that the market reports their trading activity. Now, this does beg the question, though, if we'd had the CDM already, then would we have needed ISO 20022? Would we have all needed to spend so much time and money getting SFTR implemented? The CDM takes this standardization a step further, as it is going to standardize the way that everyone in the market communicates their data from one endpoint to another. That could be from one FIS application to another, or from one internal system to another. The key here is that whether the data is being imported or exported, the CDM will be able to map it, which will allow all systems to understand it. Now, with this consistent and published data standard, the opportunities for automation should increase significantly. From a development perspective, it will be easier to write agents to interpret errors returned by the CDM and to act upon them. This will result in less need for operations staff to get involved and less manual intervention required. From a trading perspective, there will be less breaks, less chance of failures, less distraction. It's also important to note that the data going through the CDM could be transactional, it could be asset related or product related. The point here is that the intended purpose of the CDM is to model all securities financing business events and products, which will provide consistency across the entire trade lifecycle from execution to billing. After attending the showcase today, I'm sure there will be people saying, okay, so I can see where the CDM could fit in, but we just spent a couple of years implementing SFTR. We're not really in a position to do the same all over again for the CDM. And to be honest, we already have an interface to EquiLend, which works fine. FIS's platforms are all talking with our upstream and downstream systems, no problem. And our feeds go to peer for reconciliation every day too. So everything is ticking along nicely. Why do we need the CDM? In my opinion, this is not the question we should be asking ourselves. It's not a question of whether we need the CDM or not. It's a question of when do we need the CDM? And the answer to that is, well, 20 years ago would have been nice. Yes, everything isn't working okay now, but how much time and manpower do you waste on fixing breaks between counterparties, on trading errors, on reconciliation issues? How long does it take to set up and implement a new system so that it can talk to your other existing systems? Wouldn't that time and money be better spent on improving your business rather than being spent on underpinning the operations that support it? I think it's also worth recognising that this initiative is being driven by ISLA, not by some external body who has nothing to do with securities financing. This is an initiative being driven by the market for the market. This isn't something that should be ignored. It's something that should be welcomed, as it will definitely provide better efficiencies for the entire ISLA membership. Here at FIS, we see the introduction of the CDM as a long-term commitment, as the work being undertaken by ISLA and Regnosis is extremely important to the industry as a whole. The CDM subgroup is an opportunity for everyone involved in securities financing, from tier 1 banks to local organisations, to really make a difference to the future of our business. If you're at all interested in guiding the way products and events are modelled, then I encourage you to reach out to ISLA and consider joining the subgroup. The more diverse the input we can get into the CDM, then the better chance it will have of successfully and precisely describing the way you do your business. Okay, before I finish off then, I just want to leave you with one final thought, and it's this. When FIS or a customer of ours onboards a new client or a new application, there's always a substantial amount of integration work required. There's almost always a need to facilitate communication with whatever new or existing systems are present on and off site. I'm sure you're all familiar with a situation where you start off with questions like, what are your file layouts? What output data formats do you need or do you support? Can you provide us with schema for the input or output formats you need? Is there any business logic I need to be aware of or need to map? What responses should we expect to receive back from any data we send out? Can you give us a list of error messages we're likely to receive? And so on and so forth. This can be a very lengthy process and always takes up a lot of time and effort, and defining the scope of the integration project can often take weeks or months to agree on, which in turn will lead to higher costs for everyone. In the future, when we have the CDM, all of those questions can be distilled down into one. Do you support the CDM? And if the answer to that is yes, which over time I would expect to increasingly be the case, then that's all any of us will need to know. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the presentation and it's given you some food for thought. As I said earlier, if you're on the fence about whether to get involved, then drop ISLA an email, have a chat with David Schoen, as this is the time to be heard. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks Ted, and in absentia Chris. That was beautiful to see, and I'm still blushing from the name drop at the end there. Chris, the check is in the post. Seriously though, I think an important message there about how easy it would have been to implement SFTR. Think about a world in which the costs to talk between infrastructures was somewhat lower, and you're getting close to the benefits of the CDM. Anyway, next on the journey of a trade today would be a trade comparison process. So I hand you over to Matt Lyons at Pyram to take us through what that might look like.
Great, thank you, David, and thank you to you and to ISLA for involving us in this pilot of the CDM. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Matt Lyons, CIO at Pyram Systems, where I've been for the past 6 years. Prior to Pyram, I was at Citi for just under 8 years in equity finance tech. For those of you who do know me, you'll notice that I have been growing my hair since March, and it's looking very kind of as it was in the mid-90s. I'm also joined in the room just off camera by Lewis Vincente, who's a tech lead at Pyram, who led one of our SFTR tech work streams. He's going to be showing the demo in a bit. So today we're going to give you a very brief overview of Pyram. We're going to talk through what we see as the potential benefits for the CDM. We'll show you the demo and discuss some of the considerations, and then we'll wrap up and summarize at the end. So, next slide. So first of all, I'd like to give you a very quick introduction to Pyram for those of you who don't know who we are and what we do. So in the context of the pilot, we're providing post-trade reconciliation services, and we'll be taking data from the upstream systems, which you've already seen, but we do, of course, integrate with multiple vendors and multiple client platforms as well. So if you look above me, you can see a little summary of Pyram. We were founded in the year 2000 with the objective of providing automation services for the securities finance industry. We process over 2 million trades per day and see a value of $2.5 trillion per day. Our tri-party service automates $1.5 trillion worth of collateral on a daily basis, and our clients achieve a 98% STP rate for our trade automation services. And we also won the 2020 Global Investor Award Best Post-Trade Service globally. So if you look up to my right, you'll see the rest of our services. So we're very much positioned in the market as a connectivity hub for securities finance. So we primarily cover securities lending and repo, connecting the supply side and the demand side together. We have full connectivity to the 4 main tri-parties and provide clients with automated services to manage exposure and collateral with those tri-parties. We connect with central counterparties and facilitate CCP trading. We connect with market data vendors and send their data in real time on behalf of our clients where they ask us to. And we also connect to market depositories to provide process automation. Let's move on to the next slide. So in terms of our full service offerings, there's a bit of an overview here for those of you who've not seen it before. So first of all, Collateral Connect. So Collateral Connect is our collateral management service, which leverages the connectivity and the data that we have to provide visibility of collateral and help you make the best use of collateral across the different asset classes and venues. Then the next is Exposure Connect. So Exposure Connect, we also call that part of that RQV, is your one-stop shop for calculating, agreeing, and managing exposure and collateral for tri-party and bilateral trades on a day-to-day basis. That provides significant automation and is a very, very popular service. Then Pyram Connect, and that's part of the demo we're going to show you today. So that's our post-trade suite for securities lending and repo. Provides 120 clients reconciliation and trade lifecycle automation services. So that includes overnight, real-time billing reconciliations, as well as a whole bunch of trade lifecycle management services, including automating marks and returns for clients. And then finally, as Chris was talking about, SFTR Reg Connect. So Reg Connect is our most recently added service offering where we partnered with IHS Markit to provide the market-leading SFTR platform to 260 clients. So the SFTR or Reg Connect service adds reference data fields that are required, reconciles trades, generates the UTI, and reports to the TRs. And then the next project for that team is to now work on the CSDR solution for Pyram. And just one point on there, if you're not engaged with us on CSDR, please feel free to reach out. Okay, great. So that's enough about Pyram. On to the common domain model. What do we see as the potential advantages for the industry? So very much depending on how far the CDM goes, there definitely is an opportunity to standardize and provide a common definition of business practices across sec lending. So even today, where we see clients using the same vendor systems, there's differing practices and implementations between clients using those same platforms. And as Regnosis mentioned earlier, there's kind of two parts to the model, or two aspects to the model. One is standardizing and validating the data fields, but also a tighter definition of functions, which you heard about earlier, allocations and settlement. So if we are able to model the behavior of all the functions, it would provide a lot of advantage in streamlining processing between counterparties throughout the trade lifecycle. Standardization of data representation and reporting. I think this is also very key for clients internally and externally. So inside a bank, where you're reporting data to risk, credit, margin, compliance, various different areas, and especially if it's a format similar and inherited from ISDA, there's a more common language to talk about how those transactions are formed, and it should make it easier. And then ultimately for the industry, these could result in significant reduction in breaks and fails through better data validation. So what do PIRM see as the potential advantage for us and our clients? So, I mean, over 20 years, PIRM have built tools to help us streamline integrations and take data in any format. So we, as PIRM, we don't specify the data format that our clients have to use. We take in any format. So we've got a lot of expertise in translating the data. But with the CDM, that could mean that there's even more simplified and faster client onboarding, which I think would benefit all. We'd spend less time interpreting data fields. So as I mentioned before, so even clients that are using the same systems may use data fields differently, and therefore we have to interpret them differently. So there'll be more standardization. And then finally, the kind of a very big advantage that we've trialed and we're going to demo today is the ability to provide clients with the output from PIRM in a standardized format. So where we've, for example, done reconciliation, we've identified breaks, we make it simpler for clients to integrate PIRM data back into their own systems. So for the pilot demo, that is exactly what we've worked on. So a diagram here to show you what the demo, the flow for the demo. So as you saw earlier, FIS have set up a demo agent lender and a demo borrower system. They've created a break between the lender and the borrower. So as in real life, we connect to the books and records of the two institutions, consuming the block trade and allocations. One thing to note, I think there was a question asked earlier around, is there a need for reconciliation? Well, you can still send CDM data from different clients, but there may still be breaks that need to be resolved. So there still needs to be a centralized automation hub to identify those breaks and to communicate those breaks. So we're going to show you that. Just also to mention, as a result of SFTR, we've seen that less than 10% of breaks relate to the actual trade origination, and the vast majority are due to trade lifecycle events. So going down through this diagram, you've got the agent lender and the borrower have both sent us their trade and CDM formats. We then put those messages through PIRM's load infrastructure, which is built to consume, as I mentioned, any data format sent to us from clients. In this particular instance, it's CDM for the purposes of the demo. Once we've validated and standardized that data, we then put those through our reconciliation engine, which is a set of algorithms to match together the trades and identify the breaks which need to be resolved. Once that rec process is complete, that's then passed on to our reconciliation service. If we're building this rec for real, of course, we would build the translation to the CDM, but for the demo, we then call Rosetta's API that Regnosis have built for us. That translates the PIRM standard data format into CDM data format. And then in terms of actually viewing those breaks, as we're about to demo, clients can come into us via two mechanisms. So either via our user interface, which is what people do right now. And what we're trialing here is how people could connect in from their own systems, connect into our API gateway, and then the results that they receive back through the API gateway will be in CDM format. So given that that's a common format, it should be much easier for clients to integrate and to work within their own systems. So I'm now going to hand over to Luis Vincente, who's going to run through the demo. If we could start the video.
Thank you, Matt. And so, as Matt has just mentioned, the purpose of this demo is to showcase the different ways in we could integrate the CDM in our products. And the first one is in the UI. So the users will arrive to the reconciliation screen. What you are seeing here is the data from the point of view of the borrower, and this is the data that came out of the reconciliation engine. So FIS prepare 2 files, one from the borrower for the borrower, another for the lender, and with one execution each, and we asked them to introduce a break. And these files are run in CDM format, and our existing mapping infrastructure will transform these files into our internal format that our reconciliation engine can understand, and then our reconciliation engine will just those files and match the trades per them, and then do a reconciliation to find any discrepancies, because even if both clients are using the CDM format as their file format, there still can be errors in the data that they are sending, the content of the fields. So that's what our system is detecting. And as you can see here, we found a rebate rate because the borrower reported 5 basis points, while the lender reported 8 basis points. And we are highlighting this break in different ways, like through a banner or by highlighting the column. But this is not the only information that we display on our system. We also display a summary of the executions of the trades. And the top row that you can see here is the data for the borrower, and the bottom row is the data for the lender, and we have information like the client codes. We also have some information about trade references. This is data that we get from the clients, and it's a unique identifier on their systems, and they can use that information to go back to their systems and find the trades that are broken. But we also have additional information, the UTIs that we generate, LEIs, the type of trades, stock loan in this case, some security IDs. And also for those that are paying close attention to our demo, you will see that the quantities in this demo are left aligned instead of right aligned as they should be. This is because we prepared this POC for this demo, and we are displaying them as text instead of quantities as we should do. But this is not the only information we have about these executions. Our clients can use the button on the left side of the screen to access a drill down of these trades, where they will be able to see the trades side by side, and with all the fields that we got in the CDM files. Or for the purpose of the demo, they could download the executions in a JSON format. This JSON that you are seeing now on the screen, this was generated on a screen load by calling the Rosetta API live. And in a real product, we will not have that download button because we will only have the trades on the screen, or the API that we are going to showcase later on. And here you are not seeing the complete response from the API that you have seen in previous demos. Because this response is quite big, and we thought that it will be distract you from the actual object of the actual executions. And you can see that this response is still quite big. There is a lot of information going on here. And we can navigate through this file, and you will see that there is a lot of properties in this file. Some of them you have already seen on the screen. Some of them are additional information that we got from FIS. But also there are some other properties that I will describe as metadata that identify some of the fields, like for example the lender are used to distinguish between the lender and the borrower. So this is not really useful for humans to work with. Usually what our clients do is they navigate to our screens, and they find the trades that are broken, like in this case these 2 trades, and then they go back to their systems. They try to identify what's the source of that break, why they were reporting 5 basis points and the counterparty is reporting 8 basis points. They will probably contact the counterparty, and then eventually they will find what the source of the problem is, and they will create amended versions of these executions. And that will arrive to us again via FIS as new files that our system will convert into our internal format, reconcile, and the breaks will be gone. But this is like really challenging if you have a lot of trades in the screen, because we have only 2 of them here, but you can have hundreds or thousands of them. So this can get really challenging. So for this demo, we thought about how an API will look like if our clients wanted to use an API to integrate our backend in their automated workflows. And so we designed that API for the purpose of this demo. And what we are going to show you now is how this API looks like and how it works. So we are using this tool that you have seen before to test our API. This is a secure API. You will not be able to request data that is not from one of the client accounts. And what users will do is they will send a request for one of the client accounts and a given period. And our backend will receive this API. And for the purpose of this demo, we will contact the Rosetta API. And because they build the mappings for us, and then we will get the response from them. And on this screen, what you are seeing is the response of our API. That is a combination of our reconciliation output and the Rosetta output. In a real world scenario, we might do this mapping ourselves because our systems allow us to do that. But here, what we have done is we have grouped the trades in groups or paired trades, or trades that have matched together. And for each group, we are displaying the breaks in a format that is useful or meaningful for the systems or that are going to ingest these files. This is like a JSON path. It's a path that describes you which property is broken inside the CDM objects. And then what we have here is the CDM objects in groups. This is the same output that you saw on that JSON file because it's the same trades. And as you can see, this response is actually quite big, even if it's just 2 trades. And that's fine for an automated system, but if you have hundreds or even thousands of trades, this response will be even bigger. So if we were to use this in our live products, we will have to think on a different way to return the data, or even different ways of integrating with our clients' systems. And now I will hand it over back to Matt to discuss challenges and summarize.
Great, thank you, Lewis. Back onto the slides, brilliant, thank you. Just to remind you, this is very much a concept, not something that's yet live. Although do talk to us if you'd be interested in a CDM format API. So I just want to talk very briefly about the considerations that need to be addressed before we could potentially roll out the CDM, and a summary kind of what we've learned from this exercise. So CDM itself does need further work with the industry to map all the characteristics of stock, loan and repo trades. That's something that needs to be completed. Industry-wide adoption and agreement is required to gain the benefits, so it won't work if counterparties are not conforming. And an appetite for investment into standardization has got to be required to get the benefits that we're looking for here. And as Lewis touched on very briefly, and there's something that we spoke about in pilot group, the size of the message payload currently for one trade is quite large, and if you scale that up by thousands or tens of thousands of trades, it's going to be quite verbose. So we need to kind of look at the performance of how we communicate those trade data. So in summary, what have we learned from this exercise? Well, as Piram know from our 20 years experience of integrating trade data, it is possible to translate almost any client source data into a standardized format. Although the CDM could require investment from clients, integration partners can definitely help adoption and bring operational benefits that we've spoken about previously. And as with any technology, there are benefits and challenges. So we definitely, as Pyram, will be there to support the industry as it determines the direction of travel. So thank you very much to everyone involved in the pilot, and to ISLA and David again. It's definitely been an interesting exercise, and we're very pleased to have been involved.
Thanks, Matt. That was great, and a fitting end to the demonstration part of the showcase there. So yeah, thank you to all 4 of our demonstrator teams. It's been heartening indeed to see what was a theory in a PowerPoint slide back at the end of July, leading to some actual tangible outcomes today. To do that within 3 months or so of actual coding time, certainly been a new experience for me, and how quickly it can be to design, develop, code, and then adapt to the technology. So now I would like to introduce one further poll question for you that will appear on the right hand side of your screen again while you listen to our next speaker. And that is simply, which of the demonstrations today has excited you the most? Regnosis, EquiLend, FIS, or Pyram? And no, that's not a critique on their presenting skills or demonstration skills or quality of the video. I'm genuinely curious to see where you, as the industry, think the most potential is in what you've seen today. Having said that, please don't leave yet now that you've seen the demos, because we've got 2 final speakers to lead us into a crescendo in the last 20 minutes. With further thoughts reflecting on the achievements of the pilot and then potential future work that could be done, it's now a pleasure to introduce Leo Lebay, CEO of Regnosis.
Hi everyone, thank you David. Thank you to our ISLA partner to have extended this invitation for the closing remarks, and more generally for doing the first leg of that journey with Regnosis. You've heard about Regnosis before, so I won't do the presentation of the company, but just do a little bit of the story of how we get there. So around the same time last year, Andy and I met at the ISDA Technology Forum that we are both taking part in. And ISLA just published their white paper, The Future of the Securities Lending Market, which was putting forward that very, very clear vision for the new target operating model, one that would allow to reap the benefits of new digital technologies. And for better or worse, the CDM was a centerpiece in that vision, with only one small problem. I think it was fair to say that at that time, probably only a tiny fraction of participants in the securities lending market knew what the CDM actually was, let alone was crying out for it. And to add to the fun, the CDM is by nature a technology project, something that could sit very oddly in the business as usual of an industry association. But with all that, the challenges that the CDM can address are very real. So Andy, through his leadership, ISLA was determined to press ahead, push forward with the project. And we rapidly converged on the idea of running a pilot, and that this pilot would be concluded in a showcase event, the one that you are all seeing today. What that meant is what we needed was a rapid proof of value. So having an event with a fixed deadline was helpful in focusing the minds of everyone. Second, we needed a prototype that could be demonstrated to the market. So not just deliver, code for the sake of code, but as Andy said, something that would have demonstrable value. And equally, that would require solid engagement from a community of industry participants. And the idea was the opportunity to demonstrate that working prototype would be an appealing proposition for a number of solution providers in the market who became very engaged in the development early on. So I really want to thank all of the participants, so especially the partners that we've worked with very recently to put together all the demos that you've seen today, EquiLend, FIS, Pyram, as well as some of the borrowers and lenders that you've seen in the introduction slide. We've seen the likes of Bonnie, UBS, Goldman, and a few others, and everyone has really been instrumental in putting all of that together. So fortunately, we had a bit of a head start with the CDM in its present form, as it was already developed for derivatives. It meant that we didn't need to develop everything from scratch. Quite a lot of the tooling was already available. It benefited from 3 years of investment into developing the model. But what that meant is that it was also going to be a test of the extensibility value of the CDM, meaning we should take what's in existence already and be capable of handling a securities lending transaction lifecycle, with not necessarily completely out of the box, but without fundamentally having to alter the model. So really a proper extension as opposed to a rewrite. So that goal was broadly successful. We reused existing building block components that were already developed for derivatives to represent the securities lending product. Those building blocks were used to represent the sequence of events from execution to allocation to settlement. Interestingly, some of those components were and still are work in progress in the derivative space. In particular, when I think of the state transition logic and the function to effectively process the events. So the ISLA pilot, what it did is that it took them, extended on them up to a level where it was possible for that we've seen demonstrate solutions today to implement the solutions that you saw. So what that means in practice is that the pilot created a software asset with a tangible business value, and that will go and enhance the CDM, the existing CDM, with functionalities that are directly transposable to derivatives. And that part was really key because from the project inception, all stakeholders were in agreement that, and that's one of the questions that was raised a bit earlier in the panel, that we should not have an ISDA CDM and an ISLA CDM, and then why not CDM for the loan market and what have you. Rather, we should really have a common, and I insist on common, domain model with modular components that can be combined and put to work in the context of different markets that they are being applied to. So derivatives, securities lending, loans, etc. And in the end, we have to recognize the fact that the stakeholders behind those projects are effectively the members of those respective trade associations, and they are by and large the same. Financial institutions, buy side, sell side, and market infrastructure that make all those global financial markets function round the clock. So there is a vast operational efficiency value to unlock if the CDM can finally break the technology silos that have been built over the course of several decades between the different asset classes within those institutions. So this part was also broadly successful. Effectively, we followed the design principles of the CDM as it was originally developed for derivatives, and that paved the way to effectively combine the work that was already being carried out with ISLA with the extension developed by ISLA into a single shared representation. So that brings me to what comes next on this project. So ensuring that we build that shared representation of the fundamental economics of securities lending payout will be part of ISLA's future work on the CDM. Pilot participants also raised a number of future avenues of work. Examples include billing, reallocation, and far from being shortcomings of the initial pilot, this exactly reached the objective to build an engaged group of participants who are keen on adoption, who will use their seat at the table to drive the strategic priorities to be developed to support this adoption. So in other words, we really have a common domain model when you have indeed a community of market participants who are really taking ownership of the initiative. So final word on adoption. Back then, at the Tech Forum I spoke about last year, I made a prediction that by the end of 2020, we would see at least one real implementation, i.e. not just an experiment, one real implementation by a participant in the derivative market, not necessarily rolled out in production, but effectively some kind of pre-production implementation, but like something implemented for real, effectively an initial adoption. So I'm a natural born optimist. So at the time, this prediction was probably a bit bold. But in fact, we are now seeing this. And it's actually more than one. So this is very, very promising to see the CDM's position being cemented through actual adoption by market participants. But interestingly, this also brings a sobering perspective on the kind of time frame that this kind of project has to be thought about, that is required for this kind of digital disruption. Because we are now 3 years into the project on the ISDA side. However, the securities lending industry will benefit from an accelerated time scale because of the volume of what has already been developed, and also because of very, very strong network effect. As long as the CDM is effectively being developed in partnership with other trade associations, which it currently is. So in other words, adoption in a particular asset class increases the value and the benefit of adoption in other asset classes. So I will be bold again and make a similar prediction for securities lending. The pilot established that there is appetite in the market, strong momentum, judging by the popularity of the event today. So I would predict that we would see pre-production, not necessarily production rollout, but pre-production implementation in 2021. So that means we now need to get back to work. We have our work cut out for next year to ensure that the CDM will be able to support the industry's journey to greater standardization, automation, and interoperability. So back over to you, David.
Thanks, Leo, for that insight, delivered in your usual Gallic panache. Thank you very much. It sounds like in relative terms, then we could quickly get to a minimum viable product for securities lending loan with the momentum we've generated in the pilot. So that's good to hear. Very quickly, I'm going to take a look at the poll results for the question that I asked. It's hopefully they're appearing on your screen. It's fairly flat, with a little bit more interest in the reconciliation and Rosetta pieces, but as expected, fairly flat across the playing field. I'd just like to introduce the last question of the day. So if you could complete this while our last speaker talks. And it is, having watched the demonstrations, do you have a better understanding of what the CDM is, what it's for, and the benefits? Number 1, yes, absolutely. Number 2, I'm getting there. 3, I need to think about it a bit more. Or 4, sorry, I still have no idea. Hopefully it will be skewed towards 1 and 2. Note, the answers are very similar to our first poll question, with the exception of our friends in construction, who hopefully have now left in embarrassment or converted fully to the CDM cause in banking. Now, we come to the final speaker of the day, with, I believe, a possible cameo from a special seasonal character, and taking us through some future use cases and the trajectory for the industry. I present to you the inimitable Adrian Dale.
Hi there. So it's always very difficult to know what to say after so much has been said. There's been some fantastic content. You've heard about why ISLA started the journey in the first place with the Agenda for Change paper. Hopefully the presentations have addressed most of your questions. It's times like this I really miss having a live event, because afterwards obviously you'd be getting together and asking questions, and mostly having heated debates about things. So I'm going to reflect a bit on the themes of today, and I'm going to try and cover some of the questions that have been raised. If I haven't, and if you get to the end of this showcase and you've still got questions outstanding, then please do reach out to us at regtech@ISLA.co.uk. And if I go on to my sort of simplistic, perhaps personal evolution of security lending market, unfortunately it starts quite a long time ago, before some people were born. I actually first saw security lending being done way back in the early 80s. It was a book, a telephone, and a couple of guys sitting on a trading desk. And it evolved quite quickly. Actually, in the 90s, we started getting the famous green and white printed statement of positions, and it was still very much a manual business, but we've got a calculator now, so obviously we're moving forward in the world. You saw, as we went through the 90s, obviously technology improved. We saw the introduction of security lending systems. We also saw, as we got to the end of the 90s, the big topic wasn't just Y2K, but it was STP, which is interesting that it's still being spoken about. Back then, STP was just being able to create an instruction from one system to the settlement system. So a little bit different, but it just gives you some sort of perspective on the time. When we get into the 2000s, and it really starts to kick off, because we saw at the beginning of the 2000s, some of the firms who have been presenting today, reconciliation tools, market data tools, dedicated trading platforms, growth of tri-party agents. I mean, it really did kick off. And I do start to think that perhaps that evolution of the market slowed down a little bit after we got everyone got a bit of a kicking in 2008. So where we are today is, of course, highly connected. But interestingly, some of the issues that have been spoken about today and that come up in working groups are the same ones, we'll call them legacy issues, that we've had for quite a long time. So I wanted to, well, I couldn't let an opportunity go past without mentioning data and how important it is. And I've picked this picture because it sort of resonates quite well the type of thing that we're trying to address. The analogy here is that the roads are the systems and the cars are the data. And of course, the data loves flying around in the system that it was designed for, but it doesn't necessarily like moving between different systems. As soon as you move one of those cars onto one of the other roads, you have to think about speed and the type and the size, direction, and the interaction between those different systems, or in this case, the roads. That implication of interaction between the roads slows things down or speeds it up, perhaps. You have risk, you have infrastructure considerations, and then you have to think about translations and transformations and dependencies, and then potentially all the other obstacles that come along with it. Now, if we put that into the context of the regulatory horizon that's in front of us, and if I think of the example, and I don't know whether it was mentioned earlier, I might have missed it, one of the old topics that's been coming up, especially with SFTR again, was agency lending disclosure. And one of the ways that we looked at addressing that was to introduce the concept of smart buckets to measure a sort of one-dimensional credit rating from AAA down to junk. So the buckets could work in one way, but then if you imagine ESG and the regulations that are going to come from that, the fact you're going to have to be able to measure active, passive, green, brown, and any other things that might come up. We're going to need more buckets, or we're going to have a complete change in the fundamentals of how we, pardon me, how we address this. Same thing when we think about CSDR. Yes, there are a lot of ways of improving it, and there's some great tools out there to do it. But there was a panel I was on the other day, and we were asked the question about, do you think you'll ever reach complete settlement efficiency? And I answered that it was a bit like reaching the speed of light, and that you can put lots of energy into it, but you're never actually going to get completely to that point unless you change something fundamental about the way you're going to approach the problem. So, of course, it's Christmas time now, only just about, but I can slip in a slide here about some of the old problems that have been coming up in a Dear Santa list. I'm not going to go through all of them because I'm hoping that many of you already know what those issues are, but I'm going to pick out three. Interoperability, been simmering along for years, and it's been spoken about quite a bit in the presentations before this. It came back up again, of course, with SFTR, not least with agency lending, but also just counterparties communicating with each other. And today we've seen a clear demonstration how in CDM you could address this issue. So there's CDM solving a legacy problem in a completely different way and just completely solving it. I put on there as well instant reconciliation. Pardon me. In that there's some questions that you've been asking about it. CDM by itself, of course, it doesn't solve reconciliation problems. They're always going to be around. But by standardizing the communication, it gives us options that we haven't been thinking about up till now. And it's similar in some ways to the VHS Betamax, or perhaps a more up-to-date analogy would be the USB. The standardization of a connection between two devices is a complete game changer. So yes, reconciliation breaks are going to happen, but then look at the type of breaks that are going to happen. And if we look again to SFTR, one of the main causes of breaks is lifecycle events, and the fact that the example we've been using for I don't know how long about is a partial, a delta, or a complete close and a reopen. I mean, it took a long time going through that debate to get out to where we are at the moment. And in SFTR, firms are representing it to the external world in one way, but still internally perhaps they're not quite addressing it the same way. The reason I put instant reconciliation in there is because if you think about CDM and you think about blockchain, which is a conversation that sort of came and faded to a degree and has come back again, there was a panel the other day and someone said that if you put CDM inside a blockchain, then it's a match made in heaven. And I think actually that's quite a good statement to make, because it really does empower blockchain to solve the problems that when we were last talking about it, we said it's a solution that doesn't have problems. Actually, there are problems, and they're being shown to us not least from SFTR, but also through CSDR. And there's a real life result from not getting it right when you come to CSDR if we still get the penalties. So we're going to be completely aspirational about this. And what we're going to aspire to is at the point you book the trade, you would know at that point whether it was going to reconcile or not. And actually, that's a complete game changer, I think. And in the same vein as that, I'm going to put plug and play in that if there's the comment that was made earlier on, the only question you have to ask is it CDM compliant? Then you could imagine a system, a trading system, for instance, being unplugged and a new one being plugged in without the current issues that you have with translation. So I'll get to the big question, and I can see I'm going to overrun by a few minutes, but there we go. So when do we want it? In some ways, it's a bit of a thorny sort of question to look at. We could approach it in two ways. First of all is if there was a commercial approach, how would we standardize things? If there was a commercial approach, for instance, a system that became the de facto standard, that doesn't necessarily work the same way as a CDM, because CDM is open source, whereas a commercial approach would be only things within the context of that platform would necessarily be changed. They wouldn't store things that weren't relevant. So CDM is open source. That means that you get to determine what's in it, and it's not that you're requesting or demanding something from someone that's offering you a service or that you have to use. It's you coming and saying, I want to put this in there, and you propose it. And then everyone says, yes, well, we will want that as well. And I think there was a question that came up about CDM open source. Where can I see it? You can actually, if you Google for Rosetta and CDM, you can actually register for the ISLA CDM and you can see it today. So that's the open source part of it. I wanted to talk about regulation as well. So regulations obviously are designed for a specific output. SFTR is a great example. Again, it wanted to have a transparency of a certain nature, but that doesn't necessarily match up with what the market needs to operate. And also, there was a great point that was made about if you had CDM, would you have spent the time on SFTR? So I don't think I need to linger too long on that. Apart from saying that there's a proof of concept that was demonstrated last year by the FCA in their digital regulatory reporting. They actually wrote the regulation, and as they wrote the regulation, it validated itself against ISDA CDM, and if it passed, then the regulation was put in place with no change to the CDM and with no change to the firms that were publishing the data in the first place. So the question of when do we want it, it's really up to you. Yes, we could have done with it years ago. There's great interest I can see on this presentation today. There's also this adoption question that's coming up quite a few times. There are incremental approaches that you can take to this. So you don't have to do a big bang and think about budgets and resources. You can think about small incremental steps of, I'm just going to connect two internal systems together, for instance, in specific use cases, or specifically does one counterpart that I want to use the CDM with. So you can put it in small steps, and that will help the adoption. I think it'll gain pace. I'm going to compete with Leo to a degree, and I'll make a prediction that I do think that this decade we're going to see the adoption of technologies exactly like this, CDM and blockchain. I think the time is now, and in the let's say that it's over the next 10 years, and you can remind me in 10 years' time if anyone remembers, that I think that this decade is going to see those technologies adopted. And so thank you to Santa for delivering on some of those things, perhaps. I do want to say as well, thank you very much to everyone who's presented and to the people who worked in our working group and that made this possible in the first place. And sorry, David, for overrunning a little bit, but back to you.
Thanks, Adrian. Yeah, there's always one, isn't there? No, thanks for that. It was a nice upbeat way to finish. I think that's probably going to be the only trip to Santa a lot of us on the call are going to have this year. Very quickly, we'll take a look at the poll answers. So 50% of you are in the yes, absolutely category, with 40% of you getting there. If you're in that bottom 10% who are still thinking about it or have no idea still, please get in touch, either through our website, as Adrian's mentioned, regtech@isla.co.uk, or even LinkedIn, and let's have a slightly more detailed conversation about it. In fact, any of you who've been on today, feel free to do that. The more people that get involved, the better chance we have of having a product that the market wants, put together by the market, basically. So that brings our showcase to a close. Thank you all for attending, and I hope you've taken something away from today and seen how easy it is to implement the CDM, how it can be adopted in both terms of both time and money. So thank you all once again, and here's wishing you a good December.